This week, Sinan Eren, VP of Zero Trust at Barracuda, joins us to talk about the future of the cloud. Nate Warfield, Director of Threat Research and Intelligence at Eclipsium, joins us to discuss BMC&C, recently released vulnerabilities in baseboard management controllers. In the security news, ping of death returns. Remembering when the internet disconnected, if your mom picked up the phone, a 500-year-old cipher is cracked. VLC is always up to date. SIM swapper goes to prison. Rust is more secure, but your supply chain is not. If you pwn the developer, you win. You have too many security tools. Google Chrome 0 days are not news. Log4Shell, what's changed? Hive Social again, Chat GPT. There's a vulnerability in your SDK, and it takes 3 exploits to pwn Linux. All that and more on this episode of Paul Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul Security Weekly. Plextrack is the premier pen test reporting and collaboration platform, empowering your team to spend more time hacking and less time reporting. Plextrack centralizes your data, streamlines tedious workflows, automates report building, and facilitates communication with stakeholders. To learn how you can achieve a 30% increase in efficiency and cut report cycles by up to 65%, head to securityweekly.com/Plextrack. Claim your free month of Plextrack and get your copy of the Writing a Killer Penetration Test Report Guide today. Securing your organization against today's expanding threat landscape starts with data. Data you need to analyze at scale. And that starts with Devo. Devo's cloud-native logging and security analytics platform can handle unrivaled, see-it-all amounts of data and delivers the answers you need at stop-waiting-for-it speed. All so you can confidently focus on the cyber threats that matter most. Devo. More data, more clarity, more confidence. Visit securityweekly.com/Devo to learn more.
And welcome to the show. But first, let me introduce you to a man whose ugly Christmas sweater is for the children, so I'm not exactly sure how he fits in it. Mr. Paul Asadorian.
Welcome, everyone, to Paul Security Weekly. It's episode number 766, recorded on December 7th, 2022, in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. Mr. Larry Pesce is to my left. Larry, welcome.
Hey, good. Thanks for having me back. It's been another hot minute.
It has.
Yeah.
Good to have you back.
Was it last week?
Yeah, and a big week next week. Next week we got all kinds of people coming in the studio and stuff. So
last week I was down at the Mining and Metals ISAC in Kennedy Space Center in Orlando, giving a talk extolling the virtues of software building materials.
Nice.
And how it can help you pen test and secure your stuff. So, all sorts of fun.
Nonsense. I mean, that's great, Larry.
Not nonsense.
Mr. Tyler Robinson is here with us. Tyler, welcome.
What's up? Excited. I get to see you next week, and we get to see Nate tonight. Like, what is happening today? This is amazing.
I know, right? We're in good company, and we'll be next week, too. Mr. Josh Marpet is here with us. Josh, welcome.
Thank you very much, sir.
Mr. Sam Bound is here with us as well.
Hello. Glad to see you.
Quick announcement before we dive into it. Security Weekly listeners, we need to hear your voices. Leave us feedback on Apple Podcast and submit a screenshot to our giveaway form for a chance to win a $100 gift card from Hacker Warehouse. This giveaway will be open until the end of the year. We appreciate your honest feedback so we can continue to make great content for our audience. Visit securityweekly.com/giveaway to enter. This segment is sponsored by Barracuda. Please visit securityweekly.com/Barracuda to learn more. Joining us tonight is Sinan Eren, VP of Zero Trust at Barracuda. Sinan, welcome.
Hey folks, good to be here.
Good to have you, Sinan. And tonight we're going to be discussing VPNs, firewalls, identity, becoming a cloud-first organization or not. Which is, it's really interesting as I talk to a lot of people about various cloud things. And that's a really big term right there. We could be talking about a lot of different things. And I am very unscientifically, right? I'm astonished how many people are all in the cloud and how many people are not. And it got me thinking, like, what's the future? Like, how big of a battle is it to get there? And like, where are we in this journey? And is it worth it? Then I also hear some people backing away from cloud. Sinan, what are kind of your thoughts on like high level cloud adoption and migration?
All right, yeah, that's a loaded one. To be honest with you, we might end up not getting much out of that. Quite a big challenge and puzzle for a lot of organizations. But I can give you an interesting analogy from my engagement with customers. Right, relatively young customers, relatively young businesses. They might have started in the 2000s. They might be one of the early EC2 AWS customers. Right. They are purely cloud. Like the word cloud native actually makes sense in their context. They are built on cloud for the cloud. Some of these, IPO, pre-IPO businesses, typically tech, fintech organizations, they even dictate, AWS's, Azure's, or GCP's roadmap to an extent, or they used to in their early days, right? So a lot of these young organizations, let's say in the last 20 years in the tech, fintech space, some other verticals as well, might be fully cloud. But then you look at the legacy. You look at all these organizations that have been around for, if not 100 years, 50, 60 years. They are, let's say, tech-enabled. They might not be tech businesses, but tech-enabled. It's a mixed bag. They are all aspiring to get to the cloud, at least some fashion or form. It might be like they might be peeling the outer layers of the onion and pushing it to some cloud workloads, whatever they guess the best optimized service or whatever the functionality they're after. But unfortunately, I cannot tell you that there is a clear direction. And maybe we can touch on that later. There might be some interesting pushback due to macro events in the world, right? So that's what I see, that the global or the stakes where the globalism at today, where people are looking more, okay, maybe we don't want to be dependent to a global market economy. Maybe we want to be able to do like this whole chip, factories coming back to the United States argument, right? Maybe you also want to be more localized when it's come to compute. We can also talk about, of course, expenses, but I'll let you pitch in.
But it's interesting too. Like, are you organizations pushing cloud technology because of their SDLC and the software that they're writing, or are they maybe hosting their servers in the cloud in some third-party software, but they put it in the cloud so they have a little more control over it, but it's not software that they write, or the other component to that is a SaaS-based service, right? Which we've painted we have a really big canvas right now.
Yeah.
I'm trying to divide up the canvas into some major buckets. Those are kind of, but then I also think the other section of this canvas, Sinan, is one that you and I've talked about, is the network services like firewall and VPN, and the push to SD-WAN, which largely relies on the cloud in order to make that happen.
Yeah, like I said, these early, relatively young organizations, they might just have, a Meraki AP and a gateway device, and all that is, in their branch offices, in their HQ, and they don't have a concept of networking, right? It's just, you take your laptop, you connect on a Wi-Fi AP. It might be your home, it might be in a hotel, it might be in a coffee shop, or it might be in your place of business. It doesn't matter, right? They have this whole zero trust paradigm that the network is untrusted regardless where you are, right? So in that context, network security or networking is an abstraction. It doesn't mean anything anymore, right? So those organizations, when they say identity is the new perimeter, it actually makes a ton of sense, right? You go to the office, you connect to the AP. It's not different than you might have been connected to your own personal Wi-Fi. So in those relatively, again, young cloud native forward-looking organizations, it makes a ton of sense. But on the other hand, we are now hearing, for just a personal analogy again, I've been hearing lately, that product, that hot cybersecurity cloud-based SaaS product, right? I wish it was on-prem. Yeah. Then it would have been perfect, right? So I don't exactly know where is this coming from, but I'm actually looking on being a political animal that we all are, right? I'm actually looking on maybe the climate, the macroeconomic climate that we're in is actually might create some backlash, some counter trend to migrating to the cloud. There might be some organization talking in the terms of deglobalization, decentralization, and having more local data center centric stores of identity, stores of data, whatever that might be, right? So there is an interesting bifurcation. Whether all cloud, everything is cloud native, identity is the only perimeter, right? You attest to who you are, your device is conforming, your device is attested to a trusted device, you're good to go. Or let's scale everything back because of regulatory environment, because of the macro environment, and actually create this networks behind the firewall. Everything is siloed. Employees need to be back in certain arrangements with the business. So it could go anyway. We're in an interesting time.
Those are two things that relate. And what I liked about painting this broad canvas is now we can find things that relate. And you talked, Sinan, about the notion and seemingly kind of changing requirements and demands from customers that they want stuff on premise, right? You flip that, you draw that line into where I'm developing software that other people are going to consume, and now your customers don't want to consume it in the cloud, they want to consume it on premise. And what I've learned is that that's super hard. Depends on your application, but developing an application that is both cloud native and has an on-premise version that is easy to maintain. It sounds already shaking his head. That's what I've been told. They're like, oh, you mean you want a unicorn that speaks Estonian, right? I'm like, yeah, that's what we want. And they're like, that doesn't exist. Yeah. I'm like, well, those are interesting challenges, right? So one, demand is kind of driving a very challenging notion, I think, for the producers of software.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I'll share one other customer conversation. Any education organization, and one of their vendors that's very popular, I'm not going to name them, got a major data breach, right? I was trying to probe this customer about their needs for SaaS security, right? Oh, are you concerned about your configs? Are you concerned about what you store on this SaaS, PII, and all that, all the usual stuff, all the DLP angles about SaaS. The CASB used to traditionally handle it. Now there's a lot of these new type of solutions called SSPM that tackle all these SaaS configuration-related challenges. But no, the customer pushback, the only concern I have when it comes to SaaS vendors is that whether they compromise, and when they do compromise, what did I lose? What did they have on me, right? So therefore, it's an interesting conversation, right? If you think about it, they want to go to the cloud, they want to SaaSify, they want operational agility, but at the same time, all these constant news of data breaches, regulatory environments. If you're in Europe, you have GDPR. If your state ramp is coming up, all these things are creating a bit of confusion in the customer base that they are somewhat in a hybrid. They want to operate in a hybrid environment. Yeah. On-prem for certain solutions, I can totally leverage a SaaS solution that's purely on the cloud for something that's maybe from a data sense, from a PII sense, that's not that critical, right? They're comfortable moving on to the cloud.
Do you think then that customers are being naive in evaluating their business risk and what they're actually considering a risk? Because if we're moving everything to identity, we're losing a couple senses of visibility. We don't have all of the central logging. You lose the telemetry if the host is compromised. You have the lack of network, firewall, proxy, DLP, all the things that were secondary controls that could provide a second insight that you cannot, get if you're outside of the firewall or perimeter. So do you think that the customers are not really looking at this switching of nexuses from an identity risk to behind the firewall risk? And are they looking at that in the proper light with all of the information, or are they just worried about the compliance and what the SaaS providers are telling them?
No, it's a very good question. I think they are very much aware, and everybody's playing lip service to basically being, an identity-centric, risk-based, authentication, authorization, and access control, and a centralized store of, system of record. I think everybody's paying lip service to that, but when it comes to the actual implementation, I think there is a lot of inefficiencies. Everybody's worried about whether they can integrate and orchestrate these legacy solutions. I'm talking about things with fat clients and terminal servers, and a rudimentary web interface that doesn't integrate with SAML or OpenIDC. You cannot manage it through an identity provider. They want to have all of it, right? They want to be able to orchestrate, automate, integrate all of these things. And once they find out that all these new technologies that is out there, pitching zero trust all day, pitching identity-centric, risk-based authentication authorization all day doesn't really scale to their existing legacy systems, right? Those do exist. So they're in that conundrum that, yes, they want to do the right thing. They want to go after and have the right risk framework, right security framework, but the reality is much more complicated than that. And, a lot of these zero trust-centric solutions do not scale very well to legacy systems.
Yeah, we really do run into that problem, especially with all of the breaches and compromised credentials, tokens being sold and shared, improper setup of JWT tokens, SAML tokens, all those things. Like, we start to think about the risk and where we've set ourselves up for from a cloud native, even a hybrid standpoint that can offer some business risk into the on-prem just because of the way that people are leveraging these identity platforms and SaaS and single sign-on. That's a long-term conversation that I think we'll eventually have to pay the piper on, but we'll see.
Yeah,
legacy,
for sure.
In legacy is interesting because do you rewrite? Because some legacy you can't just lift and shift to the cloud. Do you rewrite it? And then what are the security implications of each of those different scenarios? Sometimes I kind of side with legacy because I'm like, we haven't modified the code or changed the configuration, so it's a known quantity of risk and operations, right? If we start changing that, now those variables start changing. Are we more at risk if we start rewriting it or glomming things onto it to try and integrate it with this newer technology? But what are the security risks?
Yeah, no, I mean, even if you want to take let's say like an incremental improvement step, right? So you want to be able to, for example, expose those legacy in-house applications to a modern identity stack. Like if you have a standard identity provider, whether Okta, Azure AD, Ping, whatever you might be using, a lot of these in-house applications, even the ones that you're in charge, don't have proper integrations to your identity stores, right? So maybe that's a good first step. You can start there. But then again, you're right. I mean, by slowly exposing it, you're also accumulating more complexity. You're taking on operational risk. And of course, there will be security implications because the way that, for example, identity providers work, they're open to public internet, right? Mm-hmm. You go to a vanity domain with your Okta or with your Azure AD, and then that's how you sign in. So there's more exposure to what traditionally been only available to the internal network, to employees that are on site. If you're a large organization, let's say that have a lot of terminals, ATMs, whatever it is, right? Now suddenly by just modernizing the identity component, being able to do SAML, OpenID Connect, things like that, you now actually have to expose it to something that is internet facing, right? So interesting. Even if you just want to modernize that.
You want to have that terminal on the mainframe, but you use Okta to log in, and there's some middleware application that dumps you into a terminal. Now you've just exposed it to so much more attack surface, right?
Right. And some organization will throw it behind a VPN. Now you have yet another layer of complexity. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, I've been in this industry for 25 years. Layering things on top of each other never actually solves the problem at the core.
No, you end up with more problems, I think. Because exactly. I've seen this in a lot of legacy apps as an example, right? Like my terminal thing is that's definitely based in reality. Like, oh, we're stuck with this legacy thing, so let me implement this new technology that bridges the newer technology with the older technology. And then when I do that, now I want some better visibility logging and whatever. So I got to glom on this other technology. And like, you're right, Sam, once you start stacking this stuff together, it starts to get really squishy from a security perspective, I feel like.
That's right. I think instead of lift and shift, maybe we should be looking more about, okay, let's secure what we have and then starts fresh, right? Let's do something maybe cloud native. Maybe it's more about a data conversion challenge, data transformation challenge. Let's build something in the cloud from scratch with all the right paradigms. By the way, let's use API-driven SaaS solution. Let's not invent the wheel over and over again in-house, right? If we need to do logging and reporting and auditing, if we need to do IAM, customer-facing IAM, let's not do it in-house anymore. Let's bring in API-driven SaaS. These vendors, they have large teams, dedicated teams with, 5 nines uptime. let's pull those in. Let's build this whole thing from scratch. Let's focus on our core competence, which is the business logic, and let's build it in the cloud. And now maybe we can work on data transportation to push it into this new cloud-based, cloud-native version of the same app,
Right,
rather
but
than
this
trying
takes
to
time.
downlift the legacy thing.
But this takes time, and you think about,
Oh, yeah.
we
Money and
all
time.
talk to enterprises and organizations, and
Yeah.
I mean, how often are they like, oh yeah, we've got like this huge VMware, like yeah, we'll do cloud stuff, but we also got this huge VMware instance that basically runs the company, right? Because they've moved from regular iron to VMware, but now the next shift that you're talking about, Sinan, requires a lot more application tuning, right? And it's more infrastructure tuning if I'm going to take what I have in VMware today and I'm going to start pushing it up into the cloud. Also, that could come with a really big bill. I think the carrot to go from iron into VMware was you probably had less of a bill because you could spin things down on your own. It was less of a bill. If you've seen people's AWS bills today, I mean, companies can tell you for every new account that we add to our product, it equals roughly $2,000 for every new account, because we're not multi-tenant yet, because that's yet another step. So I think there's a cost factor here too.
It's more than a cost factor; it's an effort factor.
Yeah, that too.
Right.
Well, that's part of the cost, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I was just going to say, if your margin doesn't give you room to swallow that, right? Yeah, you might as well stick to on-prem data center, whatever you've been doing, and try to optimize it as much as possible. But if you have, good margins, and not all verticals and industries lend themselves to that, but if you have, margin to eat it, that's a good approach. Otherwise, you're right. It is an expensive ordeal.
And having the right knowledge and expertise, I think, is key as well, because there are not enough people that can look at an application architecture and understand, kind of where you want to go and guide you and go, you want to put that service over here in this service because that's going to be the most cost effective. And I still feel like and also security tied into that. There's not enough people even today.
Correct, but I think that's a good thing. We might bring a lot more talent to the field, and that could be a nice little growth story for the labor force, right? I mean, it's an amazing opportunity for a lot of folks to go and get educated, to get trained, and grow their careers into it. I think that just brings an opportunity. That gap, that lack of resources and talent, brings a lot of opportunities forward.
But it also sounds like we're going to have firewalls and VPN as we've traditionally thought about them for some time as well. I don't think from what we said so far, I don't see it going completely away. Like there's an end time where no one has this stuff anymore. I don't think that's really true, is it?
That's what I was kind of clumsily trying to explain, right? There's a set of customers, 2004, 8, whatever, whenever EC2 become available, somehow that happened to be, formed in that year, right? I have a bunch of those customers, right? And I do believe they don't need any of those appliances whatsoever. They have a direct link to AWS. They have an SD-WAN connection, whatever, to their cloud service provider, site to site, right? That's it. They're just behind some Meraki's, maybe some Arubas. Most tend to like the UX experience of Meraki's, it seems. But
sure.
The bottom line is that's it. That's all they ever need. They don't manage networks. As I said, their devices and their users that I identified, they have FIDO2, based all these, hardware keys. Everything's pretty robust. So they don't have to really think about VPNs and firewalls anymore. Direct access, authorization layers, authentication authorization layers, boom. But on the other end, you're right. There's another set of customers that rely on these in-house applications, sometimes hundreds of them, right? They rely on SAP, Oracle, legacy, hyperterminals, and mainframes, you name it. So when it comes to it, you're right. They're going to need it for a long time. So where is that going? If you ask me, I cannot tell. I don't have a crystal ball. But at the same time, I do think that the global macro picture that we're in is tilting that view towards more on-prem and data center, oddly enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes, the appliances are going to be around because of that.
And I think we've already seen some of a shift. We've seen it with the Twitter versus, Fediverse conversation. Big companies like, what is the Signal one? The guy that does Basecamp. What's the name of his company? 7 Signals. I think it might be 7 Signals. They put out this huge blog post that they're done
37
with,
Signals.
What is it?
37 Signals.
37 Signals. Right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Josh. They put out this big post that was like, look, the cloud has these limitations and downsides, and therefore we feel like we can do a better job. So I think we're going to see, I think there was like this initial gold rush to the cloud that slowly we're going to start peeling back from. And I think we've seen that with SaaS services. I mean, for all intents and purposes, Twitter is a SaaS service for social media and short communication. And now everyone's realizing giving control to an external organization has security risk, operational risks, and could be influenced in some way. I mean, I wish I could go pull back, go into the archives and pull out what I've said about big tech companies and their ability to control the information that goes out on the internet. And I think now we're starting to see that come to fruition when people are like, wait, now technology is so easy to spin up, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud. Hey, I can spin up my own social media server. Why do I need someone else to do it? And I think 37 Signals. I can spin up my own systems, tailor it to my needs, and I don't need to pay the Amazon tax for all of that. And in fact, it's cheaper. That's not going to be every company, but I think we're going to have this mixed mash of technology maybe for the foreseeable future, Sinan.
Well, remember, it's not just... Let me throw something in there, Sinan. It's not just a mishmash of technology. It's also the risk that you take from companies that disappear. It's not just Twitter going wonky. It's how many companies have been acquired, and all of a sudden they go, hey, customers that have been happy with our service for 6 years, you don't have it anymore. Have a nice day.
There's an entire website dedicated to Google stuff that's been killed.
Oh, the Google graveyard. Right.
Yeah. I mean, the initial resistance to go to GCP was because of that. What if Google doesn't like, the revenue that they're pulling, and they might end of life GCP entirely, right? Of course, that turned out to be not correct. But the bottom line, I do remember talking to a lot of ops people. They're like, I cannot trust Google with that.
Yeah, I see their point, man. Like, I just looked at our numbers on the Google podcast store, and they're very different from other podcast outlets. And I was like, so how long before Google just kills its podcast product, right? Like, so am I going to put a lot of effort behind it, growing in that ecosystem? Maybe not.
Does Google have a podcast product? I never knew that.
They do. Google Podcasts. Well, it started out as Google Play Podcasts. Then they kind of rebranded it as Google. So they've already gone through, this is the kiss of death. Once it starts out as one thing, gets rebranded as something else, then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, Stadia was nice, and then it's not. I guess Stadia was never really nice, so bad example. But there's from a security perspective, where I was going on that, my brain had to change gears, right? That we've got our work cut out for us, I think, is where I want to go next. If you think about in like these different buckets that we've drawn, SaaS, VPNs, firewalls, applications, infrastructure, what we've established thus far is that the architecture is going to be different for all of them, cloud versus on-prem. Some level of control between someone else's computer and your own computer and everywhere in between is going to vary. Whereas before I think we looked at it as most things are going to be replaced with SaaS services and cloud. Now it's going to be this mix match of things across different areas of your tech stack, which in a way makes it harder to secure.
Well, the small and medium businesses I've worked with often do not really have the ability to run their own servers and keep them up and have sufficient backup and availability. So just for raw availability, they move to the cloud.
Yeah, I think in your smaller orgs, there could be a good delineation. Smaller org is going to rely on someone else's computer.
Yeah. I mean, I do 100% believe for SMB, smaller organizations, even mid-market, they're going to what we internally refer to as shift right? They're not going to build their own. And when we say cloud applications, it's also kind of a bit confusing, right? Are we talking about their in-house applications that run on CSPs like AWS and Azure? Or are we talking about pure play SaaS applications like Salesforce, Zoho, QuickBooks, whatever, right? So I mean that that group of cloud application is in SaaS cloud-based SaaS applications, right?
Mm-hmm.
So most SMBs will operate entirely in the near future entirely on SaaS applications, no doubt. There's no doubt. 100% of their needs are going to be served through some SaaS application.
And it's interesting that opens up an interesting attack surface for them. I think when QuickBooks is a great example. When I first started the company, I actually had software that I installed that was QuickBooks, and most places had a QuickBooks server or computer that would run QuickBooks. As soon as we figured out, I'm like, oh, I can host that stuff in the cloud. A lot of people didn't jump because they were like, well, that's not secure. I want to own my own thing. And I'm like, well, yeah, it's going to get owned, whether you own it or someone else owns it, whether it's in the cloud or whatever. If you don't practice good security, have good security practices, I should say, it's probably going to get owned. The difference is when it's in the cloud, it's really accessible to everyone, right? And it does open up more attack surface, but you're responsible conceivably for less because you don't have to build the OS to run QuickBooks.
Well, the shared responsibility model takes some of the security responsibilities away. But on the other hand, you're also talking about, you have a much wider, much broader attack surface. But the thing is that, remember QuickBooks and QuickBooks Online for a long time, QuickBooks was a much more full-featured product, just to steal your example.
Yeah.
QuickBooks Online had a lot of stuff taken out of it that they left in
back
QuickBooks
in the day,
on-prem. Yeah, back in the day. Now we're seeing the reverse. We're seeing the on-prem versions, if they have one left, is less full-featured, doesn't get the security updates as fast, et cetera. Look at Exchange. They're phasing out on-prem Exchange. If you still have on-prem Exchange, you're going to be in trouble in not that long.
Mm. Well, you're already in trouble, but for a lot of
I was going to say, you're kind of already in trouble at that point.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you another example. QuickBooks was perfect, right? In Silicon Valley right now, after Figma was sold to Adobe for however many $1 trillion, whatever that crazy number was, everybody's seeing, is there any other fat client left that I can move to the cloud and make $1 billion? Like, seriously, this is the way of thinking out here. Okay, that was Adobe, Photoshop, Illustrator, big fat. You needed to buy a massive tower with a bunch of GPUs and 64 gigs of RAM, right? Is there any more of those things that left that I can SaaSify and put in the cloud? That's the gold rush mentality. Is there any fat clients left? Is there anything really out there anymore? Do you know?
On an enterprise scale, that's
or consumer scale, is there a fat client? Is there a client? Is there an executable anymore?
Yeah,
that you use every day.
Audio and video editing, because we're podcasters, we've done that. Yeah, is something that's still.
Half a dozen startups already, just purely SaaS.
Yeah,
purely cloud.
No, but you're right. That is going to and it's also incorporating AI, which is interesting. Why do I have to have all the knowledge and experience? And I don't want to take anything away from people that do, but if you can put that in software, right, and edit that file for you, and there's a lot of services have that today. I think all it does is shrink the market. It doesn't make it go away. It's going to shrink the market. I mean, it used to be if you want to do any or audio video editing, you had to have a pretty fast computer with some pretty expensive software. I mean, or free software, but Audacity, you still had to have a decent computer if you're editing large files. So the market has shrunk, right? Now, if you do have a podcast, you can use a thing and it processes your audio. Zencaster and Riverside all process audio, and it's not as good if it was edited by a human, but it's good enough. I mean, that's what you have to do to your next unicorn, right? You gotta be good enough.
I think we eventually make it back, though, right? Like this is the circle of life that we've always seen. We went from AS400 mainframes out to full desktop clients, to zero clients, to VDI, to VMware, back out to desktop VDI and cloud VDI. Now we're out at full cloud. Then we went back to hybrid with partially VMware and some cloud SaaS applications. But really, we end up in this conundrum where we have a security, we have a performance issue, we have a always on internet reliability issue, and once one of those things fail, either a breach, security incident, a reliability incident, or an integrity incident, all of those things then make people reconsider, like, are we doing this in the best way? And then we end up cycling back. Like, this is how it's been for 30 years. We cycle back to some form of hybrid on this. And I think there is cases where thick clients make sense. There is cases where on-prem hardware makes sense. There are cases where things need to be changed, and we don't just make this big rush because we always end up going back.
It's circular.
Right. But I do still think that the original future that I had in mind, let's say 3, 4, 5 years ago, was a more of a Chromebook-based experience, or iPad-based experience. You have an endpoint that's pretty locked down, and you consume everything, whether through a browser or through a code-signed, vetted App Store distributed applications, right? No side loading. You cannot download malware. You cannot click on a random attachment and install malware. Not in that universe, it didn't exist, right? And all the tooling and software and everything that you need was delivered through SaaS. So therefore, you can use standards like SAML and OpenID Connect and FIDO2 keys to basically lock down the means to authenticate, the means to access those solutions. That was my ideal world, right? You have, again, like, you don't hear every day about Chromebook compromises. Like, I don't hear any, actually. Please enlighten me if you have a Chromebook incident recently, right? They don't get compromised. They have attestation every time you reboot. It's the same, burned instance of it. So they leverage TPM. And iPad on the Apple side offers the same thing.
If you need to, if you need to mess with your UEFI, there's a physical screw that you have to undo.
Right. So that was my future. That's what I had in mind. Like, that's the future of things. No endpoint compromise. Endpoint security for me was moot. It was like I would have said buy Leap's long-term put options on all the endpoint security companies. That would have something that I would propose. But now in this new vectoring of the global balances, like, and seriously, I'm talking about, we're political creatures. Because of that, we make decisions even in the tech IT space based on that influence. Now we might be actually saying, well, that whole Chromebook and SaaS-based world actually might go back to on-prem and in-house applications because we don't want to rely on anybody that is not us, right? That's not on-prem.
Well, here's the problem.
That's my fear.
I put a company on Chromebooks at one point, and it worked really well so long as you stayed within the walled garden. You try to access things that are in another walled garden, you're screwed. Didn't work worth a damn. So the problem is not the technology. I agree with you. The technology is you can do beautiful things with a highly locked down, highly limited, but very carefully curated set of applications and hardware and so on and so forth. The problem is that the world does not live in the same walled garden, in the same highly curated stream of apps. So,
what do you do about your developers? You're going to give them Chromebooks, like?
They have Linux emulation.
Absolutely.
They got and you know what? One of the most wonderful thing is that you have pods in the cloud where they have the entire build environment. They have the IDE and they have the whole access to the pipeline.
It's like a thin client at that point. Basically,
it is, but inside the browser, so you don't have the latency of the Citrix model of the world, or like all this VDI stuff. No, it is browser based, like Figma is, right? So the developers get to have access to it in their Chromebooks.
Wait, hold up. How do I put VS Code on my Chromebook though?
But you can.
But then we shift the threat model, right? Like I 100% agree in a dystopian type model, like. It makes sense, but then we're just shifting that risk and that thing to the cloud providers, to the hypervisor apps. We're relying on WebSockets for the threat vector, your browser exploits, JavaScript, and all the things that are able to live inside of code and have to be there in order to operate comms between the different servers. Like, I think we just shift our risk vector from the endpoint to a cloud, a provider, an app, a browser. Like that then becomes the browser, then becomes the endpoint. Now we got browser-based EDR and browser-based XDR.
Right? That's correct. That's correct. But one thing I want to tell you, and especially in a Chromebook, the amount of things you need to chain to break out of a individual browser sandboxes, right? So like every tab is now an individual process, a sandbox process for every site. Like before, if you have a Chrome exploit, you can stay resident in memory, and maybe you can collect, JSONs and cookies from other sites that happen to be using the same memory address space. That doesn't even exist anymore. You have to chain a million different things, kernel level exploits, in order to have any meaningful access. Even if you target a browser on a platform like Chromebook. So it is so much better than trying to secure a legacy endpoint. See what I mean? It's more constrained, that attack surface.
So do you really think that there is a point in time where we do shift back to this more secure model of relying on our hardware and supply chain? We're shifting a lot of our chip manufacturing back to the United States because we've got a supply chain issue. We've got a coding issue. We now have to rely on our ability to
national security issue.
And that's a whole nother issue. But once we get there, like if we can trust the hardware, do we actually get to the point where we can bring some of this and abstract that hardware layer so that zero trust actually goes a layer deeper than what
Tyler, the machines that are manufacturing the silicon in the U.S. come from outside the country.
We're not doing the compiler and the compiler and the compiler.
We are.
Yes, we are.
Son of a bitch.
So we need blockchain in order to have a.
Oh my god!
No!
Hardware chain.
But don't forget the compiler that compiled the code that is used to create the firmware to create those machines
that do the blockchain.
As long as it's on the blockchain and it's immutable, it's fine.
Oh my god!
Now you're finally making sense.
You're not helping, Sam.
You're just ungrateful.
Oh
god!
But if you generate your blockchain wallet in the cloud,
doesn't matter where you put the blockchain. So there.
It's immutable, man. The hardware that the blockchain lives on.
Nate, the non-fungible Tyler. That's awesome.
Non-fungible Tyler.
oh jeez.
How did we get here? Oh boy!
All roads lead to the blockchain.
And to the compiler and the compiler. So now, do you know about the compiler and the compiler thing we're referencing? It's
I'm thinking all the way turtles down.
No, it's
that kind of
basically it's turtles all the way down. Yeah.
Yes, it's Ken Thompson's paper from 1984. Was it 1984? Where he theorized that they could put a backdoor in login.c by backdooring the compiler and then backdooring the compiler that compiles the compiler.
If you just write your stuff in assembler, you don't have this problem.
But you still have to compile it.
Yeah.
Not in assembler.
AS. That's the
I guess
line.
I guess if you're you wait, you don't compile. It's been a while since it's done assembly because it is the actual instruction. There's no real compilation there.
Yeah,
I mean, wait. There is an assembler. I mean, you write still in unless you're writing in zeros and ones.
Right.
Then there's an assembler. There's the piece of command. Yeah. You pipe the .s file into AS. That's the assembler. It spits out an ELF binary or whatever. There's a linker. Those things didn't go away.
Right.
Well, okay.
Just because you wanted to go lower level.
How do we get? We were talking about cloud there for a while.
Yeah. How do we get here? Right?
Freaking compiler.
That's why I love having Sinan. We can go anywhere and have a great conversation. It's great. We'll talk football next. Let's do it. No, I was baiting anyone that wanted to. I turned off the Tampa Bay game because I was like, this game's over, and I should have known better. It was Brady, and he.
Oh, you mean hand egg ball, not football?
Yes, hand egg ball. Yes. Hand egg ball. Anyway.
It's not even hand egg ball. It's just hand egg.
But I think what we established is we're still going to have firewalls, but what about VPN in access devices? That market I can see shrinking.
Yeah, it's been taken over by ZTNA or Zero Trust Access, however you want to coin it. But yes, it is a modernization over legacy VPN, right? I think we touched on this several times. I was a guest here.
Yeah.
It makes a ton of sense that legacy. It's like legacy signature-based AV is all gone. Now we only talk about EDR. The same thing is going to happen to VPN. You're not going to say those three letters together. Let's say a couple years down the road, 2, 3, maybe 5 max. It's just going to be replaced with the next iteration in the technology cycle. That's currently ZTNA.
And with ZTNA that uses SD-WAN, I still need to terminate. If I've got on-premise infrastructure, I still need to terminate that. But it doesn't look like a fat VPN appliance terminator for their clients, right?
I mean, they might be using the same old VPN-like transport protocol underneath, right? It's just that mechanisms are a little bit different, right? But when it comes to the transport, it might still be, a lot of WireGuard is in play, right? But it could still be a VPN-like protocol, like IPsec or whatever. It's just really, transparent to the end user.
Right.
You deal more about
Yeah.
I mean, it's just smarter. It's just seamless. It's easier. You don't have to really deal with switching sites. If you're doing client to site, it just knows where to route you. You don't have to do like, okay, switch me to this VPC, to this VNet, to this on-prem data center or whatever. It just knows where to go. The smarter way of VPN, essentially, at the end of the day, really. And more secure because there's continuous risk assessment, which is VPNs only did at the time of login.
Yes. Should you be here or not? Well, now there's some other events. Should you really be here and what you should have access to? Yeah, well, we did talk about that before, right?
Yeah, I mean, they understand SCIM, for example, right? You go to, Azure AD, you disabled somebody, the ZTNA client gets a control message from the control plane, from the, from the management plane backend, and said, you don't belong to this session anymore, bye, and then drops your active session. VPN didn't do that for you. Yeah, it needed a timeout, or you need to, whatever, close your laptop, open it, hibernate or something, and the next time you log in, you're like, you don't exist anymore, bye. But it didn't terminate active sessions, right? So all these modern integrations with IAM and SCIM and SAML and all that makes CTNA, of course, much more compelling to legacy VPN.
And that's independent of on-premise or cloud. All that stuff ties to. You still need an identity provider. You still need an ADFS or Okta or one of those to manage your identities.
Yes, I mean the table stakes at this point. Yeah. That's right.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
you have to at least be at that level.
Yeah, I mean you need SAML, right? However you're gonna provide that is up to you. You can stand up a on-prem ADFS instance, or you just use Azure AD Okta or one of those identity players.
There was an article about SAML. There was a vulnerability in a Go library that did SAML. And I was trying to understand the vulnerability, and then I started reading a little bit about SAML. And then I went down a rabbit hole of how SAML is different from OAuth, but you'd use them together because SAML's solely about validating the user's identity. Authentication. OAuth is more about authorization. That's what I learned.
And you can mess those libraries up, and you can mess the authentication piece up. You can mess the authorization piece up. You can mess up the authorization to authentication piece with logic errors or JWT invalidations or not validating certain parts of the JWT. Like the whole identity and relying solely on identity right now, like is kind of terrifying because once you actually get past the username, password, maybe MFA, like once you have that token and there's refresh capability or they don't implement some of the security controls around if it's renewable, not renewable, then we're really talking about the ability to maintain persistence without huge long-term logs or even the ability to go back and revoke some of the things without messing up other user accounts. So there's quite a bit to SAML and single auth that people just don't really consider as far as security implications on after the authentication happens, or the flow in which authentication and authorization happen.
Right. Tyler, you touched on something that's dear to me. Implementation, or I think you call them logic errors, right? Logical errors. Implementation issues, implementation vulnerabilities are forever with us, right? It's super tough to tackle those. It's a complex protocol. Your developers need to make sense of it. They're copy pasting from Stack Overflow is not going to help the situation. They really need to have a comprehensive understanding on it, and then they need to implement it in a correct way. That there has been like firewall vendors that implemented SAML, marketed it as like, we now support modern ways to authenticate your firewall appliance. Turns out that it actually had an easy bypass because the implementation was broken, and then anybody can sign into a firewall as an admin, right? So these things happen, and they're continue to happen. And I've been prescribing in the last several years, like, well, don't implement it in-house. Like, remember I said, don't invent the wheel over and over again. Use an IAM, API-based IAM vendor that will offer it as a service. But then I'm also kind of perhaps, going back on what I said is about, okay, now, but can you trust this third-party vendor with that critical functionality as authentication, right? So it's been challenging. I recommend going using an API-based SaaS solution to do authentication for you. But at the same time, I'm contradicting myself by saying that, well, you should really go and trust all that critical functionality with a third party. So there's no winning this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because what's the alternative? You got to build all those services yourself?
Don't. You're gonna screw it up. don't. But at the same time, I also don't feel 100% confident.
Yeah, LDEP and Kerberos back in the day, I felt the same way. I'm like, we're doing in the university, right? Early 2000s. I was like, we're doing all this ourselves. Like, they're like, yeah, we need to go update the LDEP. So I'm like, seriously? Wow. There's a lot of landscape there that you've got to, almost like landscaping, right? You've got vast amounts of it to make sure it looks pretty and is maintained properly. And often was not.
That's spot on, yeah.
And also,
life is full of trade-offs.
It is. Well, that was really the gist of this segment. Really, is that basically shared responsibility model is, I think, the underpinning, kind of that underlying in the back of all our brains. Like, that's what it comes down to, is whether you're using something on-prem or in the cloud or somewhere in between, you're shifting around those responsibilities. How much do you want to? But you might be responsible for less in one area, but more responsible in the cloud scenario in another area. You got a lot more configuration management, but less, infrastructure overhead.
Spot on, yeah.
Difficult waters to navigate, for sure. We covered a lot of ground there.
Yes, a significant amount of ground about a lot of different topics. It is not an easy topic, and it's going to be very different for very different industries and very different companies. This is going to be a spectrum of things going on for a long, long time to come, guys. Long time.
Do you think the industry can actually get past some of our naming issues? Like zero trust is burnt, like from a stupid buzzwords that like doesn't match the pillars, and actually doing is this massive underhauling of like 4 or 5 different roadmaps and scenarios. Like instead of a single product, which everyone's calling zero trust, like do you think we can get past that and actually get to the core foundation of what zero trust was meant to be from all the pillars, and then can we establish products behind each one of those pillars to actually make it mean what it should mean so that people actually get this right? Like, is that something that is even possible at this point, or are we just going to rename it and start over?
Zero trust is not a product. Zero trust is an architecture, an idea, a pattern.
4 pillars, roadmap, scenario, yeah.
I don't even like those, to be honest with you. Zero trust is simply isolating every aspect of your environment.
Wait, so you mean defense in depth, or are we going back to segmentation? Are we going back even further and all the things that we've said over the last 30 years?
Yeah, but Tyler's a good point. Yeah, Tyler's a good point. The consumer of technology is like a pill, right? Like, hey, I take it, I'm zero trust now, right? Like, pick your diet fad of the year. Everybody wants a solution that they can purchase off of Amazon and it get delivered by mail. Wait, and you are now suddenly
does Barracuda have do you guys have a zero trust pill? That sounds great.
Exactly, right? That's the consumer's hope that a product, a platform delivers this thing to holistically. But of course, it's just part of the puzzle, right? Yeah, you can buy into a platform that can get you closer to a zero trust architecture, but there's so many other things that vendors don't have any visibility, any control, or any understanding, because as Josh was saying, every vertical, every customer, every industry, it creates interesting, unique challenges. Most of them don't have a single store of identity. Some of them might have 100 stores of identity. How do you provide zero trust for that? It's not centralized, right? So yeah, I mean, there is no one way to get to zero trust. It is a process that you commit to, and it's a journey. But to Tyler's point, consumers like to consume it easily, right? They don't want to think of it as a 3, 5, 8, 10-year journey. It's like, hey, I want to be zero trust tomorrow. I have the money for it, right? It doesn't work like that.
Back to your question, Paul. It's probably not so much as a pill as it is a suppository.
Yeah.
A very large suppository.
Mm-hmm. Don't use that in your marketing, Sinan.
I mean, it's free if you want it.
We have the suppository of zero trust. Can you imagine?
But it is very specific to the area of vertical and technology that you're applying it to, right? How you construct zero trust network access, different from how zero trust looks in an application that you're writing, for example.
Yeah, definitely. But the lucky thing is that zero trust tooling can give you a standard ways of achieving the same goal. So what I mean by that is that, so it's not about just client to site connectivity. It's not about getting your users to applications. You can also provide SDKs and APIs to bring your in-house applications to the same fabric, right? Again, it will be more workforce facing, not consumer, not your customer facing, not to be just B2C, but it's more like your employees, your workforce can actually achieve the same zero trust level of access if the in-house applications are also willing to kind of ingest those APIs as part of the authentication authorization scheme. So that's where zero trust is growing towards. It was always about getting you to existing applications, that support SAML, OpenID Connect, you name it, OAuth and all that. But now with the integration with existing, zero trust platforms extending to APIs, you can use it for in-house applications as well.
You mentioned SAML a lot during this conversation, Sinan. Maybe next time we have you back, we dig into SAML. Because I find it fascinating. If you're willing to do that.
No, sounds good. Yeah, of course.
Awesome. Comments, questions?
Thank you.
Awesome. Sinan, as always, it's wonderful having you on Paul Security Weekly.
Thank you, folks. Great to be here.
With that, we'll take a short break. Stay tuned. Nate, my coworker at Eclipsium, coming up next.